So we've been sitting here listening to the speakers, listening to these emerging concepts and ideas come out. And the partnership has made a decision while sitting at the table listening to everyone, the ideas, is that we are committed to investigating the idea of coming over here for a 2019 workshop to actually look at what does restorative development look like. We are talking about bringing Storm Cunningham over here, bringing other leaders in the field of streamside bioengineering, hydraulical green infrastructure enhancements for a single family home. How can we and how can people go and look at what does a single family home or a development look like that restores interflow? What does that infrastructure look like? What does it cost? How is it installed? These are just some of the ideas that we would like to come back here with for a workshop in 2019. So our last speaker, Bob Sandford, a renowned leader in water resources. Bob has been working with the United Nations on water-related issues for almost 20 years now. I had a chance to have dinner with Bob last night. We share a passion for the mountainous regions and the water cycles going on in mountainous regions. I find out from Bob that Bob is a close colleague with one of my other mentors, Dr. Hans Schreier of the University of BC. Bob, you're going to hear from Bob the culmination of the day's events. Bob was a co-author of a 2015 report of the United Nations, Water in the World We Want. You see the theme? Restorative. The world we want. The direction we want to go. Bob is an author of some 30 books, all around water, water resources, his travels and work with the UN. And his most recent work is titled The Hard Work of Hope. And so, ladies and gentlemen, if you didn't have a chance to hear Bob last night, you get a chance today to hear from Bob. Bob's going to synthesize from us what he took from today, help us work on that next step and those next challenges towards the restorative watersheds that we all want to live in. Bob?
Richard expressed his great enthusiasm for his work and for the conference, and he began by talking about the hard but good work of hope. Richard then introduced the first two speakers in Module A on how communities will get it right. And I thought it was very amusing that Richard likened Kim Stevens to a sheepdog. I thought that was interesting, running, barking, and biting, I suspect. But in so doing, keeping the herd together, moving in the right direction toward a vision. Kim then began his keynote by outlining the collaboration that led to this symposium. Kim's presentation was entitled Sponge Communities, a Water Resilient Future Despite Floods and Drought. And he noted that the origin of the idea of sponge communities occurred in China as a reaction to rapid urbanization and climate impacts, and also terrific hydrologic problems. And he said the message for British Columbians was that China was forced to adopt the concept because they were in trouble and they had to do something. BC, he offered, can be ahead of these kinds of problems. Kim also noted the importance of paying attention to indigenous wisdom, which in my mind, as I said last night, is a unique advantage that British Columbia still possesses. The issues Kim noted was that, the key issue he noted was that natural water cycles are out of balance, and a legacy of past community planning and infrastructure servicing practices. The legacy is a new normal in which the imbalance of the natural water cycle is expressed by floods and droughts. Financial costs, levels of service demands, and life cycle impacts on infrastructure, he indicated, are now driving change. He also cited Andy Rees, who coined the term voodoo hydrology. I have to admit that I've seen a fair amount of that widely. And part of this was the reliance on common design methodology that may longer pertain. And then he explained how standard engineering practice is inadequate in many instances with respect to surface water runoff, interflow, aquifer flow, and changing annual water balance. And I just want to point out to you that you're not alone in this problem at all with respect to issues of interflow representation in engineering practice. I was recently at a conference in Germany, and though they're still being applied, engineering practices there, including rules of thumb and established algorithms, are being employed that don't work anymore in changing hydrological conditions and circumstances. And what they were complaining about in Europe were outdated models created in the 1970s that have just been packaged in new wrappers, and a huge gap in willingness to adopt to new knowledge and potential practices. And what this points to a need for a better bridge between leading edge science and contemporary engineering practice. And we really need that in this country as well. It was also noted that what happens on the land matters. Water and land can't be separated. And we still tend to do that in this country. Look at our national water policies that tend to think of water as just simply a commodity, not related to the fact that the entire country is saturated with water, and that allows us to have agriculture, forestry, and tourism. And it's really true that land and water can't be separated. Neither, should I point out, can surface and groundwater, and we still continue to do that. The Water Partnership was noted as looking at the water cycle and annual water balance with fresh eyes with the goal of creating water-resilient communities. And we have the capacity to do that in this country. In 2003, Kim noted that was a teachable year with droughts, fires, floods, and pine bark beetle infestations. And as he noted, it took 5 years, but it resulted in 2008 in calls for action, such as the Living Water Smart program and Green Communities initiatives. It took, however, until 2014 for game changers to enable action. And this underscores the fact that the hard work of hope also demands patience and persistence. And if you work in water, you need the patience of God, I think. Kim then showed how the BC framework became the linchpin of change. And this underscores, I think, the need to push the focus of sustainable service forward as a new municipal infrastructure paradigm. And this led to the revelation that land development and watershed protection can actually be compatible. And the breakthrough is science-based understanding of changes in hydrology translated at last into policy. But 16 years later, Kim noted that entrenched beliefs and reluctance to change continued to delay implementation on new water balance methodologies. And I have to point out, you're not alone in that either. In 2015, the concept of sustainable watershed systems through asset management was introduced. And I think there are potential breakthroughs here that we haven't imagined yet. And I think this particular symposium underscores some of them. Watershed as infrastructure assets is really becoming a new enabling paradigm. And the current challenge is that the implementation of this groundbreaking new paradigm is so slow. Kim concluded by observing that we don't have an infinite amount of time. And in my view, this is an important comment. And while it requires patience to do what we do, I think what is missing in this country, certainly, because we still live under the myth of limitless abundance, what's missing is a greater sense of urgency in the face of changing hydroclimatic conditions. We have to advance the transformation now. And citing Storm Cunningham, Kim noted that restoration hydrology is becoming a rigorous discipline with education and proper tools. And that's absolutely true. We're hearing the notions of restoration hydrology a lot more widely. Kim's key point, though, was it's not about making things less worse. It's about making things better. And I think sometimes we settle for much less than we need, we want, or we could have. The next question he asked was, what can streamkeepers do? Well, they can learn about water balance approaches. They can expand their influence beyond the stream. And I think this is quite important. The key is collaboration between streamkeepers and local government. Zoanne Morton began her keynote by affirming the importance of voluntary willingness to do the hard work that hope requires. And I was much inspired by Zoanne. She then offered a history of the same period Kim outlined from a streamkeeper point of view. Zoanne outlined the programs that came and went during the time and their legacy. The value of the NGO community, she noted, was that they reside in the heads and hearts of decision makers. And I would argue they do that if they do so persistently and publicly. And the stewardship groups representing the public now expect and have the opportunity for input into development as a matter of course. And this, she noted, includes key legislation like changes to the Fisheries Act. But just as important, stewardship commitment is driving a greater appreciation of local sense of place and the role that water plays in nature and the quality of life wherever you live in British Columbia. And I think some of the pictures that were shown, you see how important our connection with landscapes really is. It's deep, it's intuitive, it's critical. And stewardship volunteers have witnessed what is happening in their watershed, and they care about it. The diverse backgrounds and knowledge sets of volunteers are tremendous strength. And it goes beyond what you hear as streamkeepers might feel at a conference like this, but you never know how profoundly you're influencing your neighbors and your friends by what you say, by your example, by your faith, by your courage and your honesty. And Zoanne noted that on the field trip, she learned that we're running out of land to absorb rainfall. Now, isn't that interesting? There's so much of us that there's no land left to absorb the rain. This, she suggested, tells us that much needs to be done. But she also pointed out that we know what to do. We rely on locals to monitor daily what's happening with our water courses to inform decision-making that results in protection and restoration. And Zoanne concluded with her vision of community involvement and support from decision makers in making design with nature our future. And Richard Bowes then, as the question period began, shared a terrific story about streamkeeper Bob that demonstrated how stewardship can go beyond the creek to affect broader policy. And during the following question period, it was noted that the education role of stewardship is critical, and it's the next level above activities on the water itself. And it was noted that municipal councils have great power that needs to be cultivated persistently and consistently by stewardship interests. So Anne urged streamkeepers, however, to stay within the limits of their knowledge and understanding when representing yourself to municipal governments. And I think this is really important. Sometimes we take our passion beyond what our knowledge is, and it can be hurtful to our reputation. But on the other hand, I think it's really important, as she said, but to recognize and use your expanded expertise. Look at the expertise in this room. Look at the local knowledge that you have. You have people who know those waters from years and years of observing them. Nothing can replace that. And though she didn't say it in so many words, Zoanne also cautioned stewards not to be snowed by spin. I'm sure none of you have ever had that happen to you. You know, I was sitting over there laughing at that one because, and also it tied into, in my mind, to an observation that was made about groundwater abstractions. And let me just tell you one story I had. Oh, this was good. I was on a panel with the executive director of the Stockholm Water Institute and the president and CEO of Nestle North America. And the whole thing was on the global water crisis, but the CEO from Nestle didn't want to talk about this. This was a globe in Vancouver. All he wanted to talk about is the hicks and hope that didn't want to allow Nestle to abstract water for bottled watering, which I consider a triumph of marketing over common sense myself. But he said the most amazing thing. He got into this, he said, I don't know why people are really upset about this anyway, because it's not groundwater, it's spring water, and that's not groundwater. And I thought the guy from the Stockholm Water Institute was going to die. I thought that was it. Then some wit in the audience got to the microphone and said, well, if it's not groundwater, then it's got to be surface water and you don't have a license to abstract. Okay, Zoyan is also right in this regard. Urge you all to strategically use elections to cultivate understanding. And she's also right on this. Be fierce in this. Be relentless, because other interests will certainly be lobbying their causes persistently and relentlessly. And one last observation I've got to say about Zoanne. She's good. Boy, you guys are lucky to have her. All right. Module B was a panel in a town hall session on community empowerment and sustainable partnership with local government. And Richard Bose introduced Peter Law, who moderated the panel. And I thought Peter's moderation was peerless. I mean, he immediately threatened panel members and participants with stale bun rockets that he was prepared to launch at anyone that got off track, you know. And after introducing the panel, which I thought was a remarkable panel, Peter then offered his presentation, the opening presentation. And Peter outlined the whole system approach Streamkeepers used to restore the damaged Shelley watershed. Peter then offered good news and bad news and ugly news concerning the Shelley Creek proposition and how the water balance model was employed in restoration. He explained the rise of erosion causing flows in the creek. And he said that by setting rainwater targets in collaboration with local government and developers, that was a way forward. And Peter Chapman then explained the work of the Nanaimo and Area Land Trust. The trust is focusing on 17 creeks in the Nanaimo area. Project 2000 resulted in better understanding through Streamkeeper action that has led to measurable progress in restoration. And I think this is a key point here. This was a point that has come up several times today. He said that collaboration allows streamkeepers and neighborhood associations and governments and their agencies to do far more than they can do on their own. And I think as you went through the day, you begin to see just how absolutely apparent this is. This isn't just an opportunity, it's a necessity. And Paul concluded by describing the work of the Nanaimo River Watershed Roundtable, which exemplifies, in my mind, the collaborative ideal. Judy Pisani then described her Nanaimo Community Watershed Monitoring Network and how it serves to fill gaps in monitoring needs. Streamkeepers collect data at 57 sample sites in 32 creeks and streams. That's amazing. And what's interesting here too, I thought, the province provides key data oversight and monitoring standards and analysis, and these data inform private forestry practices. And I thought it was really good of Julie because, you know, fear of being bunned did not prevent her from demonstrating that her initiative relied on collaboration of the highest order. Rob Lawrence, in a hail of bullets, spoke on local government, as a stewardship partner, and the city of Nanaimo relies on partnership to extend its capacity. The role of municipal government has changed from, he said, a machine model or organization to one of collaboration, which has been necessitated because of climate change, sea level rise, and watershed protection in the context of ongoing development zoning. Rob also noted limits to its powers as a jurisdiction. And one of the limits, he said, was a legacy of damage Nanaimo has to live with. And this is really important because you do, in an area that has been occupied for a long time, have to deal with a lot of damage, and that's the damage that we need to restore. And it's also the kind of damage that you need partnerships to succeed in addressing. And after being briefly silenced by a very well-directed bun rocket, Rob concluded by noting that restoration actually has therapeutic value for people. Now, he used a specific case, but I would submit to you that this may be more important to you in the future than we may know now. There are restorative qualities, as all of you have experienced in being out there, seeing, and also if you can help restore, that has a tremendously powerful influence, a healing influence on people. Ashley Van Aken then introduced a Regional District of Nanaimo project that aims to enhance policy decision-making with respect to wetlands in the face of pending rapid population growth. She noted that 31 wetlands and 5 watersheds have been mapped through citizen science and partnerships, and the goal is to increase freshwater security together. And I think this is a key point. Dave Clough brought up his own bun arsenal, creating a Cold War stalemate at the podium. And though a highly respected scientist, Dave talked about his passion for stream keeping and recognized many in the audience. And in so doing, he put the power of collaboration and intergenerational stewardship into bold relief. And Dave made it clear that there is not just joy, but pride also in the hard work of hope. And the town hall then commenced. How the question was asked, do we go about promoting restorative development? It can be achieved, we heard, through land use planning with a vision. Improved engineering standards can contribute. It was noted that an elephant in the room is agricultural land reserves. And I sense, and I think it's probably true from what I know and what I've seen across this country, there's a threat of potential conflict between watershed protection and restoration and agricultural practices. And this is happening widely in this country. Agriculture is widely held to be inviolate, and maybe the water balance approach can be helpful here, but collaboration is going to be difficult unless both sides deem it necessary and useful. Now, in our work, we're saying that we need a second green revolution in agriculture in this country, one that is involved in restoration, one that has much to do with water and watersheds. And I think if we could move in that direction, it kind of could actually lead in the world, because right now many of the agricultural practices that we have in this country, unfortunately, are in essence not just unsustainable, but self-terminating. So we need to pay attention to that. Monitoring standards, field sample testing, and related data collection challenges were also discussed. These are challenges elsewhere also. It was also noted that standardized streamkeeper methodologies are really helpful in giving credibility to what's done, but also making it fully exchangeable, making the data useful to everyone. Methodology is important, but just as critical is interpretation of shared data in understandable and policy relevant and policy ready forms. And I can't tell you how important that is. You touched on it today. But, you know, we almost need to create another discipline to get that done, because we exhaust ourselves getting the data, and then worst thing that I work with scientists, the thing we do that's terrible is we just go in and dump a 500-page report on the desk of the minter and say, and go, aha, there you are, and we expect you to do something about it. But I think it's really important that we work on policy relevant and policy ready interpretations of these outcomes. And this is going to be critical in addressing potential conflicts, perhaps with agricultural land use and practices. Challenges with past land use decisions and speculation with future development consequences were also put forward. And it was noted, this was important too, that storytelling values need to be explored to bring a polarized province together over water. And this is critical because divisiveness here and widely in other parts of Canada is becoming deeply entrenched. And one of the things that we can do to deal with divisiveness of this sort, we work with this widely with the UN, but I've also seen it elsewhere, is that you can bring people together who don't agree on anything except water. Really? And it's really interesting to see. But doing so can't just be a warm intention. You need data interpretation. You need to make science relevant. You need to hear stories from one another, which include Indigenous views and values. And this takes time and patience. And I also noted, this is quite interesting, that the direct pathways, that you can go right there very quickly, do exist. And the best one I heard today, I get kids to lick rocks. Well, Dave, wherever you're sitting here, I want to just tell you that there are a few adults out there that could benefit from licking the odd rock. Another thing that I think is really important is the use of the power of models and visualizations of data. So one of the most successful things we've done is to be able to visualize the loss of glacial ice in the Mountain West in a 20-second animation. That beats your 500-page report every time. Yeah. And also to be able to show that trends are real and to make them real for all. Use already proven advancements in governance, and you have, as you already noted, some excellent examples here in British Columbia. I think Gibson, as I pointed out last night, and as you heard today too, is a good one. The municipal natural assets movement holds huge promise, so look at it, and I think it's leading edge in Canada. Module C was on building blocks for sustainable watershed systems, and Richard Bose introduced the speakers. Julie Pisani talked about drinking water and watershed protection in the regional district of Nanaimo with a special focus on sustainable partnerships. She began by describing her region physically and then hydrologically. And in so doing, she demonstrated how water regions do not align with political boundaries, which is a reality that we have to really understand. She then described watersheds as assets of diverse kinds and identified the stresses on those assets. And then she noted that no one agency or jurisdiction, and here it is again, has the resources to manage these stresses. Cooperation is necessary. A joint drinking water and watershed protection plan was created, which was supported by referendum. And I think that's really interesting because then people had to go out, think about it, and decide in favor of what they wanted to do. And this plan included, and I think this is really interesting to note how she put this, nested education, science, and planning elements. I mean, nesting is important. The plan, she said, proved to be a magnet for partners and funding contributions. If you do it well and make it attractive, people will come. And then you can use these, as she said, to leverage more funding for implementation. And what I liked, what she said, is the outcome was water-centric planning on purpose. That is really something. This is leading to restorative development at both watershed levels and also at the level of working partnership. And Julie's key point is you can't restore watersheds without renewed and restored relationships with all those who need to be involved. And the results of relationship building have to be applied in planning, support, and policy advocacy, not just locally, but also in an extended way beyond in relations with higher levels of government. And again, patience is required. It took 10 years to get this process to where it is now. So such is the hard work again of hope. So if you give decision makers better information, you can leverage better water management outcomes. And Tim Pringle then talked about the leading edge work he is doing on ecological accounting practices. He began by talking about looking at watersheds differently in terms of worth as opposed to value. Ecological accounting is a process of establishing the definable benefits of ecological services derived from watershed hydrology and determining what they might be worth and how they can be optimally maintained. Tim then demonstrated how the process worked and the applications of what is derived from the process at the watershed level. And by example, Tim showed wetlands were proven once again to be the lifeblood of the watershed, finding it globally. And Tim outlined constraints imposed by already existing or approved development, noting that the timing of inclusion of ecological accounting principles into planning practices is critical. And again, he pointed out that the key is to show value for investment. And Tim's point, that was really clear. It can be done. It may take time, but it can be done. And the final speaker in Module C was Christine Mettler, who spoke about water sustainability in the city. And she began by describing the work of the Alliance to which she belongs. She then outlined the findings of research into environmental challenges in urban watersheds. And the findings also outline management challenges and potential solutions to address those challenges. And she noted that riparian habitat loss, droughts, and low flows and flooding were identified as top challenges. The major underlying causes were land use change, impervious surfaces, and climate change. And then she outlined the tools that governments have at their disposal to deal with these challenges. She then outlined perceived management barriers, which included funding, support from higher levels of government, and inadequately applied policy, which I translated also into failure to properly enforce. Christine noted that volunteer protections don't always deliver desired results, and I was talking about this last night. You know, you got to be careful. Self-regulation has very, very strong limitations to it. She also noted a tension between long-term planning versus short-term political cycles. And in my mind, that she reaffirmed the need for streamkeepers to be there during elections. You know, those are short windows, but they can be very valuable. A perceived lack of resources to support on-the-ground work affirms not just the need, but the utter necessity of partnerships. And what Christine reported shows the door is absolutely open to the kinds of partnerships and collaborations you want. And that's what this conference has been about. So fly at it. So I'd like to conclude with just a few overarching observations. The collaboration or the collaborative imperative is very well established here. And I'm glad to be able to come back and to see that. So you're doing it, so don't stop. It's hard work, it's painful sometimes, but this is the option and the way open for us. The goal cannot just be restorative development of watersheds, but the establishment and constant renewal of relationships that will ultimately make watershed restoration possible. And I think that's a critical thing that you've been saying all day and what I've heard in all the conversations. It's all about relationships. It's about trust between people. And that's why we can't afford divisiveness to become entrenched. And for that reason, you may need to keep up the urgency. And further collaboration is going to be required to guarantee long-term restoration success. Municipalities clearly are critical partners. So is the development community. So are First Nations. And it sounds like you really need to work more closely with agriculture and find ways to build bridges toward common interests. Streamkeepers and municipalities both have a great deal, and I mean this sincerely, of unexercised power and capacity to collaborate in the interests of the common good. You've only started, and in so doing, you can move outside of the limitations of formal established governance structures. It is the way to move out from under that to build new governance pathways and pathways to real power that can allow you to make change possible in a much shorter period of time. You have proven that if you change your attitudes, changes in practices follow immediately. They just follow suit. And so I ask you, and I urge you to carry on. Don't just be satisfied with slowing and reversing past damage. Keep working to make your world better. You are engaged with pride and with joy in the hard work of hope. And what you're doing offers hope to all. So thank you for inviting me.